Hello, I'm Adrian Gonzalez, president of Atlanta SCM, and it's great to be back as your host for this March 2022 edition of Transporeon Journal. We close our eyes and the world has turned around again. That's a song lyric from one of my favorite bands, Oingo Boingo, and I find myself singing those words whenever I stop to think about the world of supply chain logistics. Just when you think you have it all figured out, the world turns around again, layering new challenges and opportunities on top of existing ones. Here we are almost a quarter of the way through 2022. It's been 2 years since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, and while we're in a better place today than we were 2 years ago, we're still dealing with outbreaks around the world, the most recent one fueled by the Omicron variant. And we're also still dealing with production shutdowns, port congestion, supply shortages, especially with semiconductors, capacity constraints, labor shortages, and other challenges caused or made worse by the pandemic. If all this wasn't enough, we close our eyes and the world has turned around again, and we now find ourselves witnessing a war between Russia and Ukraine. It is a sad development with all the tragedies that come with war: death, destruction, and people fleeing their homes to neighboring countries for safety. Needless to say, there is a lot of uncertainty at the moment, including how this conflict will impact supply chains in the days and weeks ahead. According to data collected and analyzed by Interos, more than 2,100 US-based firms and 1,200 European firms have at least one direct Tier 1 supplier in Russia, and more than 450 firms in the US and 200 in Europe have Tier 1 suppliers in Ukraine. Looking further upstream into supply chains, more than 15,000 firms in the US and 8,200 European firms have Tier 2 suppliers based in Ukraine, and more than 190,000 firms in the US and 109,000 firms in Europe have Russian or Ukrainian suppliers at Tier 3. Software and IT services, automotive, agricultural products, industrial machinery, oil, gas, steel, and metal products are among the industries affected. Of course, transportation networks and services are also getting disrupted. As of this recording, for example, Maersk, FedEx, UPS, and several other logistics firms and port operators have suspended operations in Ukraine and Russia. The longer this conflict goes, the more disruptions will occur. So what now? How do you deal with all of this uncertainty? Staying informed of what's happening with sanctions, border crossings, transportation service disruptions, your Tier 1, 2, and 3 suppliers in the region, and so on is the first step. Transporeon, for example, has launched an information hub on its website that provides news and updates on how this crisis is impacting global shipping and ocean, air, and road transportation. And this is another example of where having real-time visibility to supply and demand is especially important. Doing something with all this information is the next step. For supply chain professionals, this means using this information to model and simulate a variety of different what-if scenarios. What if, for example, there is a widespread cyber attack that emerges from this conflict, and developing response plans for each one of these potential scenarios. Simply put, when dealing with uncertainty, you have to prepare for multiple outcomes. The third step may be the most difficult: letting go of the way we've always done things, when all of the evidence suggests that there's a better way forward. This includes letting go of outdated, often manual processes, outdated technologies, and outdated ways of establishing and managing business relationships. This Russian invasion of Ukraine is compounding a variety of other issues the world was facing, including record inflation. Consumer prices in the Eurozone rose by a record 5.8% in February, surpassing the record of 5.1% set in January to reach the highest levels since record keeping for the euro started in 1997. According to the authors of an IMF working paper published in February, quote, "Supply constraints hurt the economic recovery and boosted inflation in 2021. We find that in the euro area, manufacturing output and GDP would have been about 6 and 2% higher respectively, and half of the rise in manufacturing producer price inflation would not have occurred in the absence of supply bottlenecks. Globally, shutdowns can explain up to 40% of supply shocks. However, other drivers of supply constraints, such as labor shortages and aging logistics infrastructure, could have more persistent effects on supply and inflation than shutdowns." End quote. Of course, one area where inflation is rearing its ugly head is transportation. Here in the United States, for example, as highlighted in a December 2021 Bloomberg article, quote, "The cost of moving freight across oceans in November 2021 was up almost 26% compared to 2020, the biggest annual gain in data back to 1988. Freight costs via trucks was up more than 16%, the second most on record, while shipments by air and rail also experienced big cost increases." End quote. Freight costs remain elevated throughout the first 2 months of 2022, and analysts expect them to stay elevated through at least the first half of this year. It's a similar situation in Europe. Let's take a look at data from Transporeon Insights to get some perspective. On the morning of this recording, the Market Insights dashboard shows various trends over the past 13 months. If you look at the capacity index, for example, a reading under 100 indicates a capacity-constrained environment. In January 2022, the index was 94.7 compared to 99.8 in January 2021, a 5.5% decrease. In other words, we're starting this year in a more capacity-constrained environment than at the beginning of last year. In turn, this is contributing to higher spot and contract prices. The spot price index, which tracks the spot rate across 70 major lanes in Europe and weighs each lane according to its transport performance, was 121.04 in January 2022, a 20% increase from January 2021. And the contract price index, which tracks the contract rate across the same 70 major European lanes, was 110.69 in January 2022, a 13% increase from January 2021. Similar trends are evident in specific lanes. For example, on the morning of this recording, if you look at the Netherlands to France lane, you'll see that the spot rate is up 36% year over year, and the contract rate is up 14% year over year. Of course, not all lanes have experienced increases in rates year over year, but overall, many more lanes have experienced increases in rates than decreases over the past year. Looking ahead, upward pressure on costs remains. First, you have an increase in fuel costs. According to oilprice.com, the price of Brent crude oil has increased almost 65% from a year ago, hovering around $110 per barrel today. As reported by Bloomberg on February 11th, quote, Europe's diesel market is already showing signs of stress. The forward curve is signaling low supplies relative to demand, with backwardation, a bullish structure whereby diesel for prompt delivery is more expensive than for later contracts, at its strongest since 2008, end quote. And this was before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, so the situation has only gotten worse. This increase in diesel prices is also evident in Transporeon Insights. Looking at the diesel price metric on the morning of this recording, which shows the pump price in euros, inclusive of all taxes, for 1 liter of diesel fuel in the origin country of the lane selected, you see increases between 36% and 46% for the top 10 movers over the past 13 months. Another factor is adding cost pressure is the further implementation of the EU mobility package, which covers driving and rest time rules for drivers, CO2 standards for heavy-duty vehicles, and the digitization of transport documents, among many other things. Per the mobility package, truck drivers will need to take longer breaks and trucks will have to return to their home country every 8 weeks. How are these changes impacting the transportation market? In an interview with Bloomberg News, Simonas Bartkus, marketing chief at Gerteka Logistics, one of Europe's largest trucking firms, said that, quote, compelling trucks to return to base every 8 weeks will boost fuel consumption and the number of empty kilometers driven. That could create a lack of capacity in some countries, requiring larger fleets and further spurring diesel demand, end quote. When you add together higher diesel fuel prices, higher wages, vehicle purchases, and new mobility package rules, Gerteka Logistics believes that total costs could increase up to 35% compared to mid-2020. So, once again, we have started a new year with ongoing challenges, risks, and uncertainty. We all hope and pray that when we close our eyes and the world turns around again, this conflict between Russia and Ukraine will be over, leading us to better and more peaceful days ahead. Thank you for watching this edition of Transporeon Journal.